You are? Yes. Okay. All right. And so we begin this evening. I hope I'm not as rapidly as I was moving last week. More chance to talk today. For those of you who are just joining us, who missed last week, this is session number 2 of our 6 sessions this semester in the book of Numbers. And I mentioned to you last week that the book of Numbers is really the 4th book of the Hebrew Bible. We have skipped the book of Leviticus, which we will come back to. The reason I have decided to continue with the book of Numbers is because it continues the narrative of the story. The book of Exodus begins the story of freedom, and the book of Numbers ends it. So we're going to cover about 40 years of history here, beginning with the Exodus from Egypt and ending with gathering together on the shores of the Jordan River as we prepare to cross into the promised land and do battle to take possession of the land and then inherit those sections of the land that God has allotted to us. Now, while I won't refer to it often in this session, there are 2 kinds of freedom that we are discussing here. One kind of freedom is called negative freedom, or what I call freedom from. And that's what we read about last semester in the book of Exodus. Freedom from is when a group of slaves who are suffering under Pharaoh in Egypt look for God's salvation, and God sends them Moses, and he takes them out of slavery in Egypt, and he brings them to Mount Sinai. That's part 1. That's called freedom from. It's a story about how a group of slaves escape slavery and escape the persecution they are suffering and make their way to Mount Sinai. That's negative freedom. Positive freedom begins at Mount Sinai. It actually begins with the book of Numbers that we're going to start today. It begins from Numbers and goes till the end of the book of Numbers. And that is called positive freedom because there in positive freedom, you have to take the freedom that you have been given and you have to maturely learn from that freedom, learn how to live your life as an autonomous, self-governing person. So between now and the end of our course, we're going to learn how a group of slaves were transformed by their experience of 40 years wandering in the wilderness, how they became an independent, self-sufficient, balanced people who had learned the lessons that were necessary to go into the land and to begin to do the conquest in the land and to take possession. So that is the story. Those are the stories that we will cover here. From last week, I will only mention one concept to you, and that is the idea of liminality. I mentioned liminal space. Liminal means threshold. Basically, what liminal space is the time between what was past and what is to come, okay? What was past? What was past was the 210 years of slavery of the Jewish people in the land of Egypt. That was a given. They had come down to Egypt. They had been enslaved in Egypt for 210 years. They had no taskmasters. They had no lack of freedom. They had been given a very oppressive experience in Egypt. And then finally, Moses is sent to take them out. And once he gets them out, they go from slavery, which is their former existence, and they have to now make the transition to freedom, which will be exemplified by going into the land, fighting for it, conquering it, and settling it. Now, as I mentioned last time, you don't go from slavery to freedom immediately, okay? It is not a revolution, it is an evolution. It takes time to make that transition. So as you might guess, 40 years is going to be necessary because the Hebrews, when they left Egypt, were slaves who were not used to responsibility, who were not used to making their own decisions. They were not autonomous. And they had to be transformed into a free nation, a covenant people in the wilderness in order to enter the unknown future at the end of their 40 years of wandering. So that is the idea of liminality in terms of time. It's a space between what came before, where we were before, the familiar, and where we are going to, which is unfamiliar and unknown. And it's pretty uncomfortable because it's always uncomfortable to head toward a new future that you don't know what is going to be expected of you. All right. So now I'm going to ask you some questions, and you can unmute yourself if you want as you respond to these questions. The name of the book that we are studying goes by two names. One of the names is the Hebrew name is called Sefer Bamidbar. Okay, Bamidbar. And the word Bamidbar does not mean numbers. The word Bamidbar means in the wilderness, because the book begins in the years when they were wandering in the wilderness. These following events occurred to the Jewish people. So my question to you, my first question is this. I've talked about liminal time, the space between what was and what will yet be in the future. But you can also talk about liminality in terms of space. I'm going to suggest to you that Egypt was the past. That's where we came from. That was our past history as slaves. The land of Israel, the promised land, the land of Canaan represents the future. We don't know what's going to be expected of us. We don't know what we're going to have to face. The time in the desert is liminal space. The desert is the place where we are transformed from a slave people to a free covenant nation. Now, let me ask you a question. I've already discussed time with you, but why does the physical change that Israel has to go through, why does it have to take place in the desert? Okay, this story could have been said anywhere, but from the time we leave Egypt to the time we come into the land, we're going to spend 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. Would anyone like to suggest an answer to why the wilderness has to be the scene of both the book of Exodus and the book of Numbers? Anybody want to try it? Okay, Jerry, and then Joseph.
How about this one? If the Israelites had some of their needs there in that wonderful delta of the Goshen area where they had fish and water, plenty of food. Now they're in a desert where they're unable to take care of their needs. They have to rely on, shall I say, a source or a power greater than them.
Very good, Jerry. So what Jerry is suggesting is in their past life in Egypt as slaves, they may have worked very hard. They may have been persecuted, but they had 3 meals a day. They knew they were going to be taken care of. They had places to live at the end of a day, places to dwell in. Jerry is suggesting that the wilderness is a perfect place as a liminal space because the desert does not have everything. The desert lacks a lot of things. The people do not have guarantees of food, of safety, of protection. So Jerry is suggesting that as they make their transition from a slave people to a free people, what better place, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Jerry, what better place than to be a land in which you have to be dependent upon God for everything, where you can't control anything, your food, your water, your protection, your anything. So the desert is a perfect spot because it is a wilderness. Joseph, what were you going to say?
I was going to suggest that it's a perfect place because there's not a lot of extraneous people interaction, communications, civilizations. If they went to an Egyptian city, a Persian city, there's a lot of distraction. I think about sabbaticals.
Okay.
And that is, it's almost like the people are going through a sabbatical where they need to get away by themselves.
Okay. Get away by yourself.
And become a people among themselves. And I don't think you can do that if you're in another civilization. I think you need that time away to become what you're going to be.
Very good, Joseph. And I will just second what Joseph just says. In order to transform yourself, you have to leave the familiar place where you were what you were, and you have to be alone in a setting where you're not going to be influenced by other nations, other civilizations, other people. In a way, what Joseph is really saying is the desert is a no man's land. Joseph didn't use that word, but it's a no man's land. Now, in Joseph's sense of the word, why is it important that this transformation of the Jewish people take place in a no man's land, as opposed to in Egypt or some other civilization? What is Joseph already suggested? It's to be alone. Mark, you had a comment. Mm-hmm.
So I agree with these metaphysical answers, but I'm going to offer a non-metaphysical answer.
Okay.
Is what was between Egypt and Canaan? Desert.
Very good. Mark states the obvious. Of course, Egypt was a settled society under the reign of Pharaoh. It was very structured. Even Canaan at the time had 7 different nations in there, as Mark points out, has different people settled there. But the land in between Egypt and Canaan is not settled land. It is desert land. It is a land that doesn't have a lot of water, doesn't have a lot of food. So it would be very hard for people to establish a civilized and orderly life there. So the very fact that they had to cross, Mark is saying, the Sinai was in fact a desert, like wilderness, a desert. That's the nature of the Sinai. They had to go through the Sinai to get from Egypt to get to the land of Canaan or the land of Israel. Anybody else want to make an observation? All of these observations are absolutely correct. Okay. The Midbar is the perfect setting for the transformation. A transformative setting has to be a place where you can change from what you were to what you are going to be. The wilderness is not Egypt. It's not a land of persecution. They left that behind. It's not a land where they are oppressed or where they're part of a caste. The desert is not the land of Canaan. It's not the land of Israel. It's not the land they're journeying to. It's not where they're going to inherit land and establish governments and establish a whole structure of society and put into effect the laws which God gave them at Mount Sinai. The desert is that perfect spot, that in-between place where the Jewish people are really alone with God. Okay, let me say that one more time. We're alone, but we're not completely alone. We're alone with God. Yes, there are people round about. Yes, we'll meet some tribes here and there over the 40 years. Yes, we will meet other people, but we're not going to meet a civilization. We are going to have 40 years to be alone with God. And by the way, if you've ever been in a desert is a quiet place. You want to listen to God's voice, go to a desert, okay? Go to a desert. There's not a lot of distractions out there. You're not going to be distracted by this, that, or the other. You will have to live on your own, and you are going to be dependent on a higher force, okay? Whatever the people eat, whatever they are blessed with, food or water or defense, protection, it will all have to come from God, okay? They didn't bring their own food with them. Their supplies ran out. They don't have their own water supplies. They have to find water, or God has to provide it for them. They go hungry, their supplies run out, and God sends them manna each day and sends them quail to eat. So all their food needs are met by God, who is going to be there to provide all their needs. The very direction that they go in, they don't know where they're going. How do they know where they're going? Because they're accompanied by a pillar of cloud. Every time the pillar of cloud travels and goes before them, it says to the people, this way, this is the way you go. Follow after me. The pillar of cloud leads the Jewish people during their 40 years of wandering, okay? The fact that they have a pillar of fire represents God's protection, because in the evening when it's dark and they're vulnerable to attack or whatnot, the pillar of cloud becomes a pillar of fire and defends them and protects them and warms them and provides them in the midst of a cold desert with warmth and light. So the people are blessed by God. They live by God's blessings. They are protected by God's presence. They go into the wilderness to go to Mount Sinai so they can live by God's laws, okay? They don't know what to do. When the people leave Egypt, all they know is it's good to get out of Egypt and to come to a free place. But how did they live? What did they do? How did they organize their lives? They don't know any of that. That has to be revealed to them by God. And we learned that about 1 year after they left, not 1 year, 50 days after they left the land of Egypt, God brings them to Sinai, and then he begins to reveal to them for a period of over a year. He begins to reveal to them and teach them their law. So they have food, they have water, they have protection, they have guidance, and God teaches them over that course of that period of time. He teaches them their law so they have structure as a society. All right, now, that's very good, everybody. Now we know why it's got to be a desert. if I were to ask you, if I were to ask you to take a group of people and change them, okay, not just their behavior, but also their values and their beliefs. If you had the assignment of taking a group of people and bringing them somewhere, and you were in the role of God, where might you bring them to help them in their new way of life? How would you go about changing people? Anybody? Well, let me make it a little easier. If you wanted to train a people that has no military experience, no background in defending themselves and fighting, if you wanted to train people to be self-sufficient and strong and be able to protect one another and devise strategies, where would you send them? Where would you take them? Go ahead, Erwin. Erwin, you're on mute.
I would send them someplace in isolation where I have complete control over them.
Good.
Where they can be educated.
Good.
Where they can be trained.
Good.
And they can be readied for the next phase of their lives.
Okay. Does you know what you call the place that Erwin just described? You call it boot camp. You send them to boot camp. These are people who don't have any experience. They have been slaves. They've been told what to do. They can follow what they're told to do, but they can't initiate anything on their own. So if you want to train them to be militarily capable, you send them to boot camp, which is you take them out of the existing order of society. And like new recruits to be trained, you have to take them, as Erwin said, to a place where they can be trained and disciplined and hardened for the task ahead. Okay, so I think that's what Erwin meant when he said you take them away to a place. You take them, you militarily train them, you prepare them for hardships, you toughen them up for the task that they're going to face. But let's say I wasn't talking about the military. Let's say I have a group of people and I want to teach them about Jewish laws and Jewish life and how to live Jewishly. If I had them, I wouldn't take them to a boot camp. You know where I would send a group of people to teach them about how to live Jewishly? Go ahead, Gail.
I said Camp Ramah.
Camp Ramah. I'd send them to a Jewish camp. Okay. Now let me explain why. You say, well, maybe I'd send them to Hebrew school. Hebrew school is good, but Hebrew school, you see them a couple of hours, they go home, they're not living in Hebrew school, they're not following, the ways of life in the synagogue. But if I can take them to a Jewish camp, I can take them for a week or for a month or maybe a summer or a year, then 365 days, 24/7, I can train them how to live as Jews, right? Not by teaching them so much, or by teaching them, sure, but also by having them live Jewishly, all right? And that is a fact. If you want someone to experience a unique way of life, you want them to embrace new experiences, to learn how to become proficient in doing new things, you send them to Jewish summer camp. So it doesn't matter whether you regard the wilderness as Jewish summer camp and a long 40-year summer camp or a 40-year boot camp, as Erwin was saying. For both purposes, both to strengthen them and to give them the ability to defend themselves and to be self-initiating and to familiarize themselves and make them comfortable with living Jewishly, you've got to get them out of their past society, out of Egypt. They can't come to Israel yet. They're not ready. They've got to go to the wilderness. That is their training area, okay? All right, and by the way, they'll be trained in everything. Not only will God feed them and protect them and show them the way, but there are even enemies that they will confront during these years, and God will take care of them too. Remember when we started our story in Exodus, Pharaoh says to Moses, take your people and leave Egypt, get out of Egypt, no more plagues. And Moses takes the people and brings them to the Red Sea, and Pharaoh has a change of heart, you remember? Pharaoh says, what have I done? I've let these people go. Go, my men, my chariots, my horsemen, go get the people. Get them, they're caught by the Red Sea. Take them, anybody who resists, kill them, and bring the rest back here, okay? The people are protected. They're protected against the chariots and forces of Pharaoh. Later on, they'll encounter other enemies like the Amalekites, and God protects them. So God is providing them with the on-the-spot benefits, blessings, and protections that they need. And then they get to Mount Sinai, and there at Mount Sinai, they change. They no longer are going to be slaves anymore. They are now suddenly supposed to become God's covenant people. Covenant means an agreement. God takes them, he draws them close to Mount Sinai, and he says to them, okay, I brought you out of Egypt. I've cared for you. I've watched over you. Now it's the time for you to make a declaration. Will you accept me as your God? Will you follow the way of life that I have indicated to you? And the people say, God, whatever you do, we'll follow it. Naaseh v'nishma, we'll do it and we'll hearken to it. In other words, God says to the people, are you prepared now to accept me as your Lord and to follow the way of life I'm going to give you? And the people say, we're all in. Everything that you ask of us, we will do. And then for 1 year's period of time, from that first Sinai experience until the following year, the people just sit at Sinai and they study Torah. Okay, can you imagine that? Can you imagine if you had an enforced study session, a period where you could just sit and study the laws of this new way of life? Imagine how nice that would be. You can understand why the people were reluctant to leave it. While they were in the wilderness, they had food, they had protection, they were taken care of by God, they had blessings, they were taught Torah. No wonder the people didn't want to go. I can live here, I can live in the wilderness, God's with me and God's providing everything. But finally, after a year at Sinai, God says to Moses and the Jewish people, okay, your time has come to go. Your time has come to take your experiences, take the law I've given you, and go into the land. Well, the people are really shaken. What do you mean go into the land? You mean we have to do this ourselves? We have to make our own decisions? You're not going to protect us anymore? Now, instead of getting food from heaven every day, we got to go into the land and we have to grow grain and we have to harvest the land and we have to provide our own food. Now, instead of you protecting us with a cloud of fire or a pillar of cloud or a pillar of fire, we have to go in and fight the enemies ourselves. We don't want to go, God. We like it here. And by the way, here, it's not just at Mount Sinai because God has provided them with something else. He says, oh, by the way, when you leave Mount Sinai, I'm not going to be gone from you because I'm telling you people, build me a tabernacle, build a structure. And if you build this structure for me, this sanctuary, this dwelling place for God, I will come and dwell in your midst. I will live amongst you. So not only do people have all these other benefits and blessings, but God is dwelling in their very midst. In the very midst of their camp, the God of the universe is dwelling. So not only do they have all these great things, but what could be better? They want to have a relationship with God. They come to the Mishkan, the tabernacle. They bring their offerings. They can express their thanks to God. Here, God, we want to show you our thanks. We want to show you our appreciation. We want to express our regrets for the things we have failed to do. Here, we're bringing our offerings. God wants to communicate with the people. He appears in the tent and says to Moses, Moses, I've got a communication. Go tell this to the people. Everything is perfect. The people are all around. They are living right around the Mishkan, close to God, with his laws. And whenever they want to relate to God, they bring their offerings and they serve God through religious worship. And whenever God wants to speak to them or give them direction, he talks to Moses, their leader, and Moses, the prophet, reveals law. Perfect system, right? You'd have to be in a way rational to want to go into the land because that now you're going to have to be responsible. And yet, God has to do this. God has to wean them. Wean, that's a great word, wean. You know, a baby, you wean a baby from mother's breast milk and whatnot, and from milk in general, and you wean them so they're independent. They can feed themselves, provide their own nutrition. God has to wean them from dependency. And how do you wean a people from dependency? Well, that's a very difficult thing. So let me ask you the question. You already know God. You know God is all about order. You guys, how many of you were with me with Genesis? You remember? On the first day, God said, let there be light, and there's light, and God divides between the light and the darkness. And God divides the upper waters from the lower waters by creating heaven. That's the second day. And then God creates a firmament to separate the two. And then God begins to create other things, okay? On the third day, he divides between land and dry sea. God loves order. He loves perfection. On the fourth day, he uses the stars in the sky and the sun and the moon, and he creates divisions of time. He begins to create animals for the earth and for the sea and for the air. God, during the seventh day, is a perfect artisan. He makes a perfect world that is balanced and orderly. Everything is exactly as it should be. So by the seventh day, by the Sabbath day, God has given humanity, which comes at the very end, a lesson in order. It says, if God is saying to humanity, see this beautiful world I've created, this world represents order. Now I want you to live in this world in order. But there's a problem. Human beings can't live in order. Why? Because unfortunately, God gave us something else besides intelligence. You know what else he gave us? He gave us free will. He gave us human nature. And you know what happens when a human being with free will has a chance to either follow the perfection, the order in God's world, or to disobey it. Human beings will always choose to disobey. I'm just going to mute everybody once more because they're just background noise. There we go. Okay. All right. So God, who is a God of perfect order, can create a world that's perfect. But unfortunately, if the world is going to stay perfect, people have to do it themselves. God can't be there creating order for them. And since we know that human beings don't do a very good job of it, 10 generations God creates, the world becomes so bad, God says, I regret the way I created the world. I'm going to destroy it. I'm going to create a great flood, and I'm going to begin over again. 10 more generations come by. That doesn't do any good either. The generations get worse and worse. They build a tower to challenge God. God is disappointed. Finally, after 20 generations, God says, you know what? This isn't working out. I need these free people to freely choose to create order in their own lives. I can't make order for them. They must make order for themselves. So this now is a problem. Human freedom demands that order not be imposed by God, but it be self-imposed. Okay, understand, self-imposed. If I am going to live in a certain way, in a certain kind of society, following certain rules, and I'm going to establish relationships with my fellow human beings, I better learn self-control through my family, through my clan, through my tribe, I better learn how to live in a society, right? God's not going to do it for me. God wants me to do it. God put me in the world to be independent. And therefore, here is the problem. Yes. I'm sorry?
No, you're fine.
Okay, I'm sorry. Therefore, in order to solve the problem, what God has to do is he has to create the opportunity for human beings to accept and create and imbibe and commit themselves to this kind of social order. Not only must they accept God's freedom, but their human freedom must also agree to accept the social restraints and the demands made upon people if they're going to live in society. So here we are. Now we are in the desert. This is the perfect place for all of these disciplines to come together, right? Now we've got to take all these disciplines and we've got to learn human freedom and we've got to learn order. We're not on our own. God is going to help us, but we've got to learn from what God gives us. So what does God do in the book of Numbers to help teach us or help us accept order? But anybody who's read any of the book of Numbers, can you tell me something that God has done in the book of Numbers to help human beings develop the social skills and the societal skills to create order? Okay, Joseph, then Gail.
Well, he directed them to organize themselves by family or by tribe.
All right. God.
And he gave leaders. He actually assigned leaders to each tribe to organize.
Very good. God organizes the society in such a way that a person is part of a family. Families are part of a larger social grouping called the clan. Clans are part of a larger grouping, which we're going to trace in a minute, the tribes, and the tribes are all separate parts of one great community, which is the people of Israel, Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, which is one nation. So God creates opportunities, and he even creates role models, okay? I may not be a leader, but how do I learn leadership? Well, if I grew up in a family, my dad teaches me what's necessary to raise a family. My mom teaches me that. I learn how to raise children, how to set certain limits, how to raise them, how to rear them, what to demand of them, okay? So God provides me with parents to help me. When I live in a larger society, how do I govern myself? What do I do? Yes, God provided Moses and God provided Aaron, but God provides a lot more than that. Moses and Aaron couldn't run the people by themselves. What does God provide? He provides a whole tribe, the tribe of Levi, to take care of sacred functions. The priests, the Kohanim, they're going to bring up the offerings of the people to God, and the Levites are going to take care of the whole liturgical service of the Jewish people. He creates judges and elders and officers and various kinds of groups within the society by which the society is going to regulate itself. In other words, God is going to do what Joseph says. He is going to give them examples of how to learn leadership. Gail, you were going to say something.
I was going to say what Joseph did, but I guess one other thing would be the census that God
All right.
requires.
God is going to do a lot of things to structure the people. God is not only going to give them leaders, God is not only going to give them laws, he's not only going to give them families and societies to perfect these laws, he's going to give them, as Gail suggested, order in another way. So let's talk about the ways. Okay, what does God do to order the tribe? First of all, the tribes are numbered. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about today. Why do we call this the book of Numbers? Why does it start with a census? Well, because to order a society, the first thing you have to do is teach them how to organize themselves and how to know what resources they have. That's called a census, okay? As you go on a little further, you're going to see other things. Where did the Jewish people live? They live in certain places in relation to the tabernacle, just like they were all close to Mount Sinai. You're going to learn that 3 tribes live on each side of the tabernacle. 3 live on the east, 3 live on the west, 3 live on the south, and 3 live on the north. So of the 12 tribes, these 12 tribes are going to be spread around the tabernacle, equal distance from the tabernacle. God will be at the center of the camp, but the people's life will be ordered around the tabernacle. And then inside the group of tribes, you know who's in the inner circle? There's an outer circle, those are the tribes. And there's an inner circle inside the tribes. You know what they are? The priests and the Levites. Okay, you're going to see that in a second, and in next week. When they're organized, the people are counted. We know how many people we have, how many of each tribe, and how many of the people in total. But we also know how many Levites there are and how many Kohanim. So that God is going to order everything. Now, God is a stickler for details. This is where you're going to live. This is how you're going to encamp. These are the banners you're going to fall by. These are the responsibilities of the Levites. These are the responsibilities of the Cohens. Later on, when it comes time for God to tell the people to go on to the land, they have a certain marching order. You've heard the expression marching order. Well, when the Jewish people travel, 3 tribes come first, followed by the ark, followed by another group of tribes, followed by a third group of tribes. So the tribes even have their own marching orders by which they march. Everything that we will see in the first part of Book of Numbers has to do with organization. The laws, even the laws that we give, are laws designed to explain where different people belong. Priests belong in one place, Levites belong in the other. The tribes belong in another place. People who are diseased or have contracted certain kinds of impurity, they can't be in the camp at all. They have to be outside the camp. If one wants to be a different status person, like a Nazirite, or one is suspected of a crime, that's still another category. God is going to give the people all kinds of categories. And he's going to say, these are the categories, these are the groupings, this is the way you live. Now everybody follow the law. Do this. Follow along, do this. And so by living this day after day after day, week after week, month after month for 40 years, it becomes second nature. How do the people learn about Judaism? They live it. That's a Jewish summer camp. They get the laws. Moses teaches them. They learn it. They do it. They know every morning they got to go out and get manna in the wilderness and gather it. They know they can't keep it over. They have to eat it for that day. They can't leave it to the next day. They know that whenever they run into trouble, whether they need water or food, God is there to provide them. But the people have to be able to depend on order. If there's no order, the people get frightened. That's when they get scared, when the order breaks down. All right, so all these things, including the laws which the people are given, all these are part of the structure that comes in the book of Numbers. So Gail started us off, so let me begin with Gail's suggestion. The first thing you read about, I'll ask you. The first chapter, I gave you chapter 1, verses 1 to 54 in the book of Numbers. Someone want to give me a summary of what that chapter was about? Not hard, you can do it in a few sentences. What was the first chapter of the book of Numbers about? Go ahead, Gail. Gail?
It's about the census.
About a census, all right? I'm going to read you the first part. This is not very interesting stuff. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month of the second year, okay? So the Jewish people have been gone 1 year from Egypt. It is now the second month. The month of Passover is the first month. They have been away from Egypt for just over a year, for about 13 months. And God speaks to them, and he says to them the following: take a census of the entire assembly of the children of Israel according to their families, according to their father's household, by number of names, every male according to their head count, from 20 years of age and up, everyone who goes out to the army in Israel. Okay, so God says to Israel, all right, you want to know how I'm going to start you out now? You've studied my laws and whatnot. Okay, ready to go? All right, first thing I want you to do, take a census. Now, how in the world does taking a census help to organize the people? Anybody want to explain? First of all, why do we take a census? Does anyone know why a census would ever be taken? God tells Moses to do it. That's a good reason to do it. But apart from that, why would anybody take a census? There are two general reasons for why people take a census. Does anybody know what those two general reasons are? Go ahead, Jerry. Mark, I'm sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Two reasons. One is for taxation, and the other is for military conscription.
Right. Taxation for economic benefit or for military means, so you're protected. Either to protect yourself militarily or financially, you've got to know what your resources are. You cannot presume to know how to defend yourself or how to finance the operation unless you know how many people you've got. Michael, was that what you were going to say too?
Well, I was going to say taxation, but also accounting. I didn't get the conscription part. I hadn't even thought about that, but it categorizes the people into groups.
All right. You want to know who you've got. You want to categorize them, as Michael says, into groups. And as Mark says, you want to be able to know what your forces are. You notice it says when they count the people, they count every man. They're told every male according to their head count from 20 years of age and up. Why 20 years of age and up? What would be the purpose of 20 years of age and up? Erwin, go ahead. Oh, you're still silent, Erwin.
So I normally press the space bar to speak, and I don't take myself off the off mute, and you can hear me. But for some reason, you couldn't hear me this time.
Good.
Well, anyway, 20 years and up, obviously, that's for conscription, for military service.
Military service. You people have been here long enough. You've been at the mountain. I've been protecting you. Now you got to go into the land. You've got to take the land yourself. You have to fight battles. You have to conquer the land. And then I have to divide the land among you. So for a couple of reasons. Number one, as Erwin says, military purposes. How many warriors do I have? And by the way, in case you didn't know, the age of adulthood in Judaism is not 13. That's modern. you don't become a man at 13. In the Bible, you can become a man at 20. Why 20? 20 was the age at which people entered into military service, okay? 20 years of age. That was considered the flower of manhood at 20 years of age. It says 20 years of age and upward, but there is an upper limit because it says 20 years of age or and upward to go into the legions of the Lord or the army of the Lord. There is an upper age. You know what the upper age is for serving in the army? Anybody happen to know? Go ahead, Gail.
I think it said 60.
60, that's it. So they are to take a census of all the males available. And notice, not females, not minors, not old people. Take a census, count each tribe of the available males 20 years of age to 60 years of age. Now, the rabbis explicate this and make this clear. The law is from 20 to 60 years, the people are counted. So in the count that we are going to have here, and we're going to take a look at the count in just a second, the number of people that they have, and by the way, it's over 600,000, just for your own interest. That's 600,000 men, 20 years of age to 60 years of age. So do a little arithmetic. If you've got 600,000 plus men, if you add women and children, what's your population going to be? What do you think? At least a couple million people. You're talking a couple million people, right? Not every man is going to be married, but chances are, if you add up everybody below the age of 20 and everybody above the age of 60, and you add in women and whatnot, you're going to have probably somewhere in the area of 2.5 to 3 million people. So you're talking about a lot of people, and you'll see that reflected in the numbers. When we see the numbers, you're going to see how many eligible men there were to go into service to fight the battles of God that were to come, okay? So, Gail, you are correct. The first rule of responsibility, count yourself, okay? I love the expression, I count. That means not only I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but I count, I matter. I'm a person who matters. I am significant because now I count. You can count on me, which means you can depend upon me. You need warriors, you need people to battle, you need people to help bring us into the land and to drive out the enemy and to settle. Count on me, I count. I'm one of them, all right? So this count is for military purposes, but also for support, taxation, I should say, because you're going to learn something very important. How does the society govern itself? Where do they get the wherewithal to live? You're going to discover that the way they count also determines how they gain revenue. I'll explain that in just a second. All right. So let me ask you a question. Okay. Now we know how to count. But the question I can ask you is, why does the Torah have us count people at all? Why is the Torah ever interested in counting the number of the Jewish people? Why is the Torah interested in telling me there are 600 and I forget, 636, 40, whatever, over 600,000 men of military age 20 to 60. And therefore, by extrapolation, there's a couple. Why does the Torah tell me that at all? Why is it interested in telling me that? Anybody want to explain that to me? Go ahead, Jerry.
Could it be that they are witnessing the prophecy that God gave about them becoming a mighty nation?
Yeah, God's, I'm not going to say boasting or bragging, but God is saying, look, I promised your ancestor Abraham long ago. I told him before he had any offspring, I said, I'm going to give you a child and I'm going to give you grandchildren and I'm going to make you a great nation. And now God is boasting. He says, hey, remember when you went down to Egypt and you were 70 members of the family and your retinue, your 70 households? Remember how at the end of 210,000 years, I turned you into millions? In a way, it's to show the miraculous nature of the nation, that in the 210 years that they were living in the land of Egypt, they had grown from 70 families to a nation of a couple million people. That's number one. And the second reason is to begin to tell them, all right, now you're going to have to fight your own battles. As you fight the battles, figure out what your manpower is, figure out what you can rely on, figure out, how you're going to divide your forces, and you're going to assume the responsibilities for going into the land of Canaan and for conquering the land, and then figure out how you're going to settle all the people in the land that you take. The census was taken. Okay, this is important. Who takes the census? According to what we just read here, and you're going to go tribe by tribe through all the tribes of Israel. Who does the counting? Does anybody want to tell me who does the counting? Okay, interesting question. Michael, go ahead. Who does the counting?
So it's the job of the tribal chieftains.
The job of the tribal chieftains. Yes, Moses and Aaron are overall responsible for the total number. But Moses and Aaron don't sit there and go 1, 2, 3, 4. And to do this and to count all these millions of people would take forever, right? So they tell all of the tribes, look, each of your tribes, summon your families, and then summon the families together into clans, and then bring them to clans together into tribes. Moses says, I want to know the number of men, 20 to 60 years of age in each and every one of your tribes. So Michael is correct. The tribal chieftains join with Moses and Aaron in the responsibility of counting the people of the tribe. Why, Michael, do you think the tribal chieftains would be involved with this? Why specifically the chieftains?
You mean versus random people, or the chieftains are the ones that are generally respected in their tribe, I would assume.
Yeah.
But I mean, it wasn't clear to me from reading this if God just right there appointed the chieftains, or they existed and he pointed them out to.
We're given the names right here. Whether they existed or not, they probably existed, and God is telling us who they are. Because it says right afterwards, these are the names of the men who shall stand with you, meaning Moses and Aaron. For Reuben, Elitzur, the son of Shedeur. For Shimon, Shlomo. So you get the 12 tribes, you get the name of El, okay? Each of the tribe knows the clans and the groups. And so Moses says, Aaron and I don't know who's in your tribe. You know what your tribe consists of. You're going to have to be responsible for deploying these people. You're going to have to be responsible for dividing the land. Therefore, number your tribes, number your fighting men, number the men who are going to go up. And so each leader of the tribe, in their presence and in the presence of Moses and Aaron, ultimately, the people must take an accounting, a numbering of their numbers. So how do you count? Okay, this is the next part. How do the Jewish people count? If I were counting all of you, and I'm not going to count you, so I'm sorry, that's wrong. I could just look at the screen and say, all right, I'm going to go across my screen. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Plus anyone else who might be listening who I don't see. Okay, Jews never, ever, ever count that way. Okay, how do I know that? Because God, when he tells us we have to take a census, he tells us the method we are to use. Now listen to this. This goes back to Exodus. You don't have to turn there. I'm going to read it for you. The Lord said to Moses, when you take a census of the children of Israel, according to their numbers, every man shall give an atonement for his soul when counting them, so that there shall not be a plague among them when you count them. If you're going to count Jews, you don't sit there and count people, okay? You do not do that, okay? Even in the synagogue today, when I'm counting a minyan, God forbid I should ever turn around and say, do I have a minyan here, and start counting people? Why is it that Judaism says, if you want to count someone, don't count them like you count an object. Take a donation from the person, mention the person by name, and that's how you, and then when you've mentioned each person by name, when you've received a donation from each person, count up the donations, count up the similar donation, which is always the same, it was a half shekel, count out that and you'll know how many people you have. Why does Judaism use this roundabout way to count people? Anybody want to tell me? Okay, go ahead, Neil.
Because they're people, they're not things. And so people actually have behavior and take action.
We're not oxen, we're not cabbages, we're people, okay? When you count things because things are just things. There's no distinction between them. You know, 1 bush, 2 bush, 3 bush, you know, four sheep, 5 sheep, 6 sheep. Those are just items. But what do we know about each human being? Neil, it's already you suggested. What do we know about each human being, Neil? What do we know about you?
The actions that are taken,
Yeah.
the behavior.
And more than that, we know you're created in the image of God. You are invaluable. You are irreplaceable. You cannot be treated like a thing, Neil. Each one of us who God creates is like an entire world. God has created each of us with distinctions and differences, and no person can treat everybody else as if they're things. Now, in some societies, it is true. I will tell you this, and I'm going to be honest with you. I'm watching a lot of shows now about ancient Rome. And if you see these shows about ancient Rome, you see that they had hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of soldiers. And when you watch their battles, you watch them go into battle with just numbers of soldiers. There's no individuals. When it comes to counting people, it is an exercise in mass, okay? Counting is a mass exercise. When I count something, I'm not interested in individuals. I'm interested in the total. I want to know what the final number is. If I'm counting for taxes, I want to know what's the final amount of money I'm going to come in. If I'm counting for battle, like in Rome, how many forces do I have? How many troops do I have? How am I going to meet the enemy? How should I deploy my forces? I've got to know total numbers. The last thing in the world I want to do is know this individual and that individual. I want to know the mass. I want to know the group. But Judaism says you can't treat human beings that way for the very reason that Neil suggests, because we are not things. We are of inestimable value. We are not quantifiable by numbers, okay? There was a time in Jewish history when someone tried to take away our identities and turn us into numbers. You know when that was? World War II. They gathered us together from cities all over Europe. They brought us into central location points called ghettos. They took the people and they shipped them from the ghettos in transit, and they sent them to the camps. And what was the first thing that happened to these people when they got to the camp? What was the first thing that happened to these people after they arrived in the camp? Does anybody remember? Yeah?
They had a number tattooed on their
They
arm.
lose their name. They're not a name anymore. They're a number. I am number such and such. When they do roll calls, they don't count by names. They count and they reckon by number. You cease to be a human being. You cease to be an individual. You become a number. You become chattel. You become an object. So long as I am me, myself, of inestimable worth, you can't take away my identity. I am unique. But the moment you categorize me as a thing, the moment you treat me as a part of a great whole, I lose my individual value and significance. That is the whole idea behind the way Jews have to count people. You can't count people like objects. You can't take away the value of each individual. You must recognize the dignity of each and every person who you count who is part of your group, and you do that by the following method. I'll explain it to you. Here's what it says. Now it says, this shall be the manner of counting them. They shall give everyone who passes through the census, a half shekel of the sacred shekel. Okay, a shekel is 20 gerahs, half a shekel apportioned to God. So what would they do? When each man came to be counted, how was he counted? He came to the tribal leaders and he said, "Hi, I am Isaac, son of Abraham. I am of this particular family, and here's my half shekel." Then the next person comes, and he identifies himself by name. I am Shimon, son of so-and-so, and here is my half shekel. Each person is recognized by name. His individual identity is validated. He is recognized as a person. And then he gives, as his representative amount, the same half shekel coin. It's exactly the same. You can't count if people are giving different amounts. I give a half shekel, you give a half shekel, the third person, the fourth, everybody gives a half shekel. So by the end of the counting, in each clan, each family, each tribe, and you have collected shekels and you want to figure out how many people there are, don't count the people, count the shekel, count the half shekels. And that tells you how many people you've got. So you not only know how many people there are, but you have also raised money to help support the community, okay? The half shekel was not a large sum of money. If you want to know how much was a half shekel, about 70 cents. Everybody could afford about 70 cents. It was a minimal contribution, even the poor. The idea was the poor could not give less and the rich could not give more. Everybody had to give the same amount. And when they registered, when they were numbered, when they were counted, they gave the half shekel, and then the half shekels were counted. And that was the way in which the Jewish people were numbered. Anybody have any comments on that or any observations about that? Yeah, go ahead.
It reminded me of the way Jews are supposed to be buried in a plain pine box. When you return to God, when you return to the earth, everybody is supposed to be the same, no matter how much you earned in your lifetime. So this, to me, was very much the same. Each man had the same value. And that was not value,
No,
but-
we each have infinite value.
but
Our value is the same in God's eyes. That we are, some man might be more intelligent, some man have this skill or that skill. But the point is, in the scheme of things, we are each alike. We are each worth the same thing. We are each equally important and significant. So when you count, don't count by leadership. In the ancient world, the Romans always counted by objects, but they didn't count their leaders that way. The leaders were unique. The elders, the elites of the army, they were unique. They had identity, but the soldiers were just numbers. 30,000 troops. I don't know their names. I don't know who they are. They're just 30,000 troops, okay? It was a stark number. But when it comes to the Jewish people, there is a principled protest against this view. The human individual who's made in the image of God and therefore is of unquantifiable value and non-negotiable value, we cannot be counted like other material things. Each of us is of unique value. Each of us is of infinite value. Each of us constitutes a world in itself, and each of us is unique. And therefore, in counting us, don't treat us like objects. We'll give you money. Each of us will make our contribution, count the money, count the objects to get the number, but treat us as individuals. Don't debase us by treating us as just mere numbers. Don't turn us into numbers. Okay, that is the Jewish way of counting. And there's even a special term for it, okay? And this will be my last comment, and then we'll open it for discussions. In the Torah portion that begins our reading, in the beginning of the book of Numbers, we read the following. I'm going to read you in English. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai from the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month in the second year after the exodus from the land of Egypt. So now, God gives Moses the command. He commands him. He says, speak to the children of Israel. It is 1 year and 1 month since the Exodus. And God says to Moses, take a census of the entire assembly of the children of Israel according to their families, according to their fathers' households, by number of names, every male according to his head count. The people are to count in a certain way. Now, there are lots of words for the word count. Limnot, to number. Leaf code, to calculate. What are other words here? I have a list of words. Limkot, livnot, lechashev, to calculate. But the Torah does not use any of those words when it says take a census. You know what it says in Hebrew? It uses the following phrase. It says, when you take a census, you shall lift up the head of each of the children of Israel. Lift up the head. Okay, that's what it says. It goes all the way back. Kitisa, when you number the children of Israel, It actually means when you number them, lift up their head. That's what it's meant by a census. When I say to you, we're going to count you by lifting up each of your heads, what does that mean? When you hear the expression to lift up someone's head, what does that mean? Go ahead, Diane.
That they're valued as a person.
Don't disvalue them. Don't treat them as if they're not valuable. Treat them like a person, which means I want your name, who you are. Who are you? You are you and you are unique. I do not want to disvalue you. And if I treat you like I treat an object, I have disvalued you. Okay? So I must lift up your head. To lift up your head literally means to elevate you. Okay? When I lift up a person's head, I'm counting him, yes, but I'm also giving him dignity. Diane, I recognize you. You are here. You are one of the people who are, I recognize your dignity and your individuality and the contribution that you make. That is called lifting up the head. When the Jewish people are counted, they are counted in this very special way. If the Jewish people count in every other way, you know what the inevitable result of that counting is? There's always a same punishment. God warns the Jewish people, when you take account of warns the leaders, when you take account of the people, you shall lift up your head in the census. And if you, so that the following not occur. What are you trying to prevent from occurring? Give you an example. King David later in his life wants to number the Jewish people. And he decides to take a census, and he doesn't do it this way. He counts them like an object. What was the result of David counting the Jewish people? Yeah.
Plague.
Plague. God sends a plague. People like objects, like worthless things, God sends a plague. And David atones. The moment after he tells his officers and his different leaders in the different tribal areas, take account, meaning go count the people, David realizes he's made a horrible mistake. David's servants don't want to do it. Abner, his general, attempts to tell him, don't do this. This is not right. This is not the way Jews are supposed to count people. You don't count people like objects. If you treat them like objects, if you treat them as if they're not worthy of honor, God will punish you by sending a plague. You will suffer the plague. And David is forced to atone in the midst of this plague that follows his counting. And he says, I did wrong. I disobeyed God. I did not count people in the proper way. I did not take a census in the proper manner. And therefore, God is punishing my people for my sin of counting them. Okay? You have got to count people the right way. What God is saying here is, as you now prepare for your next part of your journey, your adventure, Israel, first find out who you are, but don't do it by counting people as objects. Count them as individuals and count them in the following manner. That is the rule. Okay, let's see, what is my last comment here? Oh, importance of counting. I'm done. My wife says that I'm done. All right. So my wife, who is guiding me in all things, she says I'm done here. So the purpose of counting is to show the value of each individual, the uniqueness of each individual. I have to count in order both to know how many people I have for military purposes to support the welfare, the economic well-being of the congregation. But when I count, I have to count in a way that recognizes the individuality of each individual person. Can you imagine that? Everybody who goes for a count says, yeah, I went and I told them my name. I gave them my name. My name is so-and-so, the son of so-and-so. I'm from this family. This is my clan, and here's my contribution. Now they're counted, but more importantly, now they feel they count. They feel like they're individuals. They feel like they're not being treated as merely as objects, as things. And so this first count reveals to us an important fact, the number. Now I'm going to share a screen with you, okay? So here I'm going to share, let's see, share screen. There we go. I'm going to share how you count the Jewish people. Share. And then do I have to hit anything else?
No, they should see it.
Okay, I'm going to wait to make sure that everybody can see. Can Can everybody see that chart that I have up there?
Yes, they're saying.
Yes.
Good. All right. I see you shaking your heads. I hear yeses. If I'm going to count the Jewish people, I count by tribes. Okay. Moses tells each tribe, who is the head of each tribe? The tribal leader, right? How do you determine that there are 12 tribes in Israel? You got to go back to the story of Genesis. The 12 tribes come from the 12 sons of Jacob. All right, so everybody look at this chart here. Does everybody see the name Jacob right there? I'm pointing my pointer right there. Jacob has 2 wives. His first wife is Leah or Leah. His second wife is Rachel. So Jacob has 2 full wives. Their names are Leah and Rachel. But he also has 2 concubines, which are kind of like half wives. They're not kind of full wives. The concubine, the maidservant of Leah, her name is Zilpah, and the maidservant of Rachel, her name is Bilhah. Now, this is the order in which the children are born. Watch the numbers. Everybody see the numbers here? Okay, watch. Leah is the first one to start giving birth. Her first son is named Reuben. Her second son is named Shimon. Her third son is named Levi, and her fourth son is named Judah. Poor Rachel is not having any success. She has no sons of her own. So what does she do? She says to Jacob, I can't give you sons like my sister can, but take my concubine, take my concubine Bilhah, and she'll produce sons for you. So take a look down here, down at the bottom here. See, Bilhah, the concubine, has 2 sons, 5 and 6. What are their names? Dan and Naphtali. Everybody see that? Okay. So Leah has 4 sons, Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. Then Bilhah, the concubine of Rachel, has 5 and 6. And then when Leah sees what's happening, she gives Jacob her concubine, whose name is Zilpah, and she gives her 2 sons, 7 and 8, Gad and Asher. Okay, that's 8. And then what happens? After 7 and 8, 9 and 10, now Leah starts bearing sons again. She gives him Issachar and Zvulun, and finally that's 10 sons, and then she gives him a daughter. She gives him Dinah, okay? So now you've got 10 sons, 1 daughter, and then finally God remembers Rachel, and he gives Rachel 2 sons. And who are the 2 sons that are given to Rachel? Joseph and Benjamin, okay? How many sons is that altogether? 12 sons. The 12 tribes of Israel come from Jacob's 12 sons, okay? So everybody understand where the 12 comes from? Okay, now I'm going to get rid of this. Here, show me how to do that. And I'm going to bring out the next one. And now I'll show you where the tribes come from. Okay. Okay, so those were the, that's it, good, okay. And this one right here. Okay, we're just going to look at the picture at the top. This is the camp of Israel, okay? This is the camp of Israel. Now, I said there are 12 sons, which mean there should be 12 tribes, right? But we have a problem here. The problem is that one of the tribes is not counted as a tribe. Which tribe is not counted as a tribe?
Levi.
The Levites. Levi is a son, but the Levites are not serving in the army. The Levites have their own special function. They serve God. So remove Levi. Now you have 11 sons, okay? Now, interestingly enough, you have 11 sons, okay, but you have 12 tribes. Where does that extra tribe come from? Because Joseph, remember, Joseph is one of the sons. Joseph is broken up into 2 tribes. When his father, Jacob, comes down to see Joseph, he says to Joseph, I'm giving you a double portion. So instead of just you, Joseph, are going to be broken up into 2 tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. So if you take Joseph out, as a separate tribe, and you take Levi, the Levites out, and you add Ephraim and Manasseh, you have 12 tribes. Now take a look at this camp. Does everybody see the camp here? Right here in the center, that little, where my arrow is, you see my arrow? I'm moving it around. Does everybody see it? That is the ark. Just like the people were gathered around Mount Sinai throughout their 40 years of wandering, the 39 years of wandering, they arranged themselves equal distance around the ark. On the east are the following tribes. There's the tribe of Judah, Issachar, and Zvulun, three tribes. On the south, there's a tribe of Reuben, Shimon, and Gad. On the west, there are the tribes of Benjamin, Manasseh, and Ephraim. And on the north, there's a tribe of Naphtali, Asher, and Dan. 12 tribes surround the ark, okay? 12 tribes, 3 on one side, 3 on the other, 3 on the third, and 3 on the fourth. 12 tribes. The ark sits right in the middle. Each tribe is equal distance from the ark. And each of these 3 tribes has a insignia from one of the tribes. On the east, it's the insignia of Judah, the banner of Judah. On the south, it's the banner of Reuben. On the west, it's the banner of Ephraim. And on the north, it's the banner of Dan. So each of the tribes, and this is what you're going to see next week in the ordering of the camp, each of the tribes is going to have a certain order surrounding the tabernacle. Now, inside each of those camps, inside the tribe, there's an inner circle, and the end of the portion talks about the Levites. The end of the portion, after you number all of the tribes of Israel, then Moses is told to number the Levites and the priests. Here are the total numbers. Take a look, and I'm going to send you this so you have it. Judah has 74,600 men, 20 to 60 years old. Issachar has 54,400 men, and Zvulun has a total of 57,400 men. The tribes on the east total 186,400. The tribes on the south are 151,450. The tribes on the west are 108,700, and the tribes in the north are 157,600. You combine all of those tribes together, and you've got the total population of the fighting men of Israel, okay? And if you look in between, if you look at the subgroupings between each of the camps, you will find the number of Kohanim and priests. I'll show you that next week, who serve God. So what you have here is the tribes of Israel are divided into each tribe. They're placed in a certain position around the Ark of the Covenant, and they are all placed around the Levites, which serve. Everything is ordered. Everything is perfect. Everything is the exact way it has to be. I'm sorry?
No, nothing. You're good.
My wife is telling me I'm going into far too much detail and I should stop. So I'm stopping. All right. All right. The point is, if you notice anything about Roman legions, they always had a certain order, a certain number of troops. Each legion, the legion had an overall number, and then each legion had divisions, phalanxes. You knew exactly where you were if you knew which division you were in, which phalanx you belonged in. That was the order of where you stood in the camp. That was how you lived. That was how you lived around the ark. And when the ark started to move, that was the order you marched into. The tribes in the east, they moved first. Then they were followed by the tribes in the south. And then came the ark and all the appurtenances. Then came the tribes in the west. Then came the tribes in the north. The way you encamped, around the camps, the banners by which you were recognized, each one was distinctive and ordered. So you see that this seemingly nonsensical business of counting people was not nonsensical at all. When they counted the total number of people, by the way, and you have it in your portion, we know exactly how many people there were, because after they count, each of the tribes We then are given the grand total of the men 20 years to 60 years of age. So we are told at the end of this count, let me find it for you. After all the count is taken, this is all through chapter 1. At the end of this, it says, let's see. Okay. 41,000. Oh, okay. 59,000. Okay, Naphtali. These are the countings of Moses and the leaders of Israel. 12 men, 1 man for each father's household they were. These were all the countings of the children of Israel from their father's household from 20 years of age, everyone who was fit to go out to the army. All their countings were 603,550. Okay. By the way, if you want to go through the counting and check it out, you can check it out. It's yeah, go ahead, Gail.
So how do we account for the fact that this is the same exact number as the census in Exodus?
All right, so Gail asks a quick question.
I mean, can it really be?
The census was given in Exodus. They were counted after they left Egypt, right, Gail? Okay, they were counted again before they're about to journey, correct? And Gail says, wait a second, the number of people that they counted when they left Egypt and when they came to Sinai, the number of people they counted is exactly the exact same number as the number of people that they are counting now. How can that be? Does someone want to explain that to me? How can it be the exact same? Does it mean that everybody who died was replaced by someone who was born? No, Gail. The count that was taken when they left Egypt and this count were part of the same count. They counted the same number of people because it was in fact the same number of people. Theoretically, as the second year begins, the people that are included in the count are the people from, well, I'll have to explain that to you next time. Theoretically, there is one group that says, yes, the same number of people who died in the intervening days, that's how many people in the tribe were born. But it has to do with the way they counted. When you were counted throughout the first year's period of time. So they didn't take they didn't count, they counted the same people twice, actually, two separate times. So you have the same number of people. I will address that in my notes to why the same number of notes, why the same number of counts. Okay.
I just thought that was interesting.
It is interesting, and the question is asked in the book. Rabbi Sachs, when he's talking about the counting, if you read his article about counting, about numbers, accounting, he tells you, how do we account for the fact that the numbers were the same? Read Rabbi Sachs, and I'll send some information that will make that clear as to what happened. But basically, there wasn't a lot of time between the two counts. The count after they left Egypt was basically this count of the same population after they had been 1 year in the wilderness. Yes, people were born. Yes, people got older, but the number of people who passed from younger to the years 20 to 60, that number doesn't change all that much, and I'll explain how that works. All right, I'm going to stop here. Does anybody have any questions or observations, or have I thoroughly confused everybody at this point? The notes will help you read the notes, and I think with the notes, you'll be able to understand. Does anybody have any questions?
I do.
Go ahead, Carol.
Did they, does it say how often they should count? Was it an annual thing? Was it?
No, it was not an annual thing. As a matter of fact, referring to counting, the Jewish people in the entire Torah are only counted, if you count all of the books of the Torah, are only counted 6 times. And they're only counted for certain reasons. Why would the people be counted? Why would you count again? One of 2 reasons. Either because 40 years have gone by and you've got to know how many are left in the end, or because you're going to hear that people die because of transgressions and because of plagues. And at certain points, you have to know how many people have died and how many people are still alive. So the only time the Torah will count people is to record the number of people there were at a certain time, and then after calamities and after disasters and after punishments, and at the end of this cycle, they will count the total number one more time. Okay, anybody else?
Rabbi,
Yes, go ahead, Ira.
Wouldn't you count after battle?
You would count after battle, but the Jewish people during the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, Ira, did not see much battle. The truth was, if they had gone right into the land when they were supposed to, right after they were numbered here, if they had immediately followed God's instructions, Ira, and gone right into the land and done battle, then right, after battle, they would have had to have been counted. But remember what happens when the Jewish people are told they're going to go into the land, they chicken out, they get scared, and they send spies in. And when they hear that the land is filled with enemies and they're strong and powerful and live in mighty cities, what do the Jewish people do? We don't want to go in the land. We don't want to fight. Why did you bring us out here, Moses, to die in conquering the land? We want to go back to Egypt. We want to return back and be slaves again, okay? So during their years of wandering in the wilderness, Ira, they didn't lose too many because of battles, because they didn't fight too many battles, but they did lose them because of disasters which are going to occur. What are the two great disasters? Plagues and the death of the generation who is 20 and above. Those people will all die out except for two people before the end. So you have to make up for the people who are going to be gone at the end of the count. You have to count the people who die of natural causes or die of plague. And that's why they're only counted 6 different times. And by 6, the first time they're counted, it's the sons of Jacob, Jacob's 70 household. They're counted the first time when they're in the book of Genesis. They're only counted 5 times more, 4 in the book of Numbers, and 1 more time in the book of Deuteronomy. So they're only counted sparingly. They're counted when they have to be counted, and then they are counted in the traditional manner by giving the half shekel, not counted by numbering the people. Okay, anybody else? All right, I see that we are about at 8:30. You're more than welcome to stay on the line. I'm not chasing you off. For next week, this is the following. You're not going to read much. You're just going to read the very next section. You are going to read chapters 2 and 3 in Numbers. Okay? We've already got the numbers. You've already got the count of the tribes. You know how many military men there are from 20 to 60. You know how many Levites there are. And next week, I'll tell you what the Levites' functions were. You know how many Levites and Kohanim there are. But now you're going to learn where they live, why they live in certain places, and why they are grouped by tribes. Some of you might say, why are we dividing them by tribes? This is one nation. Why not just mix them all together? No. It is very important that the Jewish people maintain their tribal affiliations, even though they will eventually become one united people, one covenant nation, one group of Jews to serve God, the people of Israel. They will always be identified by their tribe. And your job is to figure out, based on the Sachs reading, which is pages 73 and 78, I'm sorry, page 79 to 86, and reading the 2 chapters, chapter 2 and 3 in Numbers, figure out why the Jews are always counted by tribes. Why don't we just count the people? There are X many Jews. Why is it that we always count by tribes? Why is it that we don't get rid of tribal divisions? Why is it important to maintain our tribal identities even when we are united as a nation? You'll see this even at the end. The Jewish people are one united nation, but we maintain our tribal distances. And if some of you say, because they have to know how they're going to fight the battles when they go into the land, or they have to know how to divide up the land among the various tribes and how many members there are in the tribe, you're exactly right. Later on, those tribal numbers are going to be very important for the conquest and the division of the land of Israel 40 years later. Okay. Okay, yes, Carol?
Oh, no, I was just waving goodbye.
Waving goodbye, all right. hopefully this will make more sense when I send you the notes. Regurgitate it, look at the notes, rewatch the lecture if you have to make sense of this. I think it does make more sense after you have the notes in front of you. If you have any questions, I promise you next time I'll ask anybody who has any questions to ask your questions first before I go any further. I'm not going into chapter 2 and 3 of the next reading until we've got all of your questions answered. So everybody have a lovely end of the day. For those of you still passing out candy, it is almost 8:30, so I don't think you're going to get too many other late trick-or-treaters. If you do, they're probably older kids. Hopefully you haven't distributed all your candy. You still have candy to pass out. And I will see you all. Oh, first I'm going to stop our recording.